Hello friend, this is Dr. Magaranna from Magar Family. Welcome to my YouTube channel. And today's our topic is pathogenesis of type 2 diabetes mellitus. In the previous video, we have talked about the type 1 diabetes mellitus. That is pathogenesis of type 1 diabetes mellitus. In type 1 diabetes mellitus, these beta cell of pancreas are destroyed by the autoantibodies. Autoantibodies. So beta cells are destroyed. Since the beta cells are destroyed, therefore there is no insulin. Since there is no insulin, there is no absorption of glucose into the target organs. So glucose remain in the blood and blood glucose level will be increased. This is the type 1 diabetes pathogenesis. But in case of type 2 diabetes, here the defect was in the pancreas. This beta cell is present in the pancreas. But in case of type 2 diabetes mellitus, the defect is not in the pancreas. That is, beta cells are absolutely normal. They are synthesizing the insulin and secreting the insulin. And insulin is present in the blood. This is the blood vessels. In the blood, insulin is in normal range. Insulin is in the normal range. But the defect is in the insulin receptor. That is tetrameric insulin receptor. This is the tetrameric insulin receptor. The insulin acts on mainly three target organs: skeletal muscles, adipose tissue, and liver. SAL. You have to remember SAL. Skeletal muscles, adipose tissue, and liver. Insulin try to bind with insulin receptor, but unable to bind because insulin receptors is defective. Since there is no binding of insulin with insulin receptors, therefore no GLUT4 channels implanted. No GLUT4 channels are implanted on these target organs. So there is no glucose entry into the target organs, and glucose remain inside the blood only. And this is how blood glucose level increases in case of type 2 diabetes mellitus, because the defect is in the tetrameric receptor, that is 2 alpha units and 2 beta units of receptors. Glucose is present in the abundant amount in the blood only because of the defect in the tetrameric receptor. The skeletal muscles, these are the skeletal muscles, the muscles which are attached to the skeletal, called as skeletal muscles. And the adipose tissue, fat belly, these are the adipose tissue. And the liver has the hepatic cells. These are the target organs for the insulin. When insulin acts normally on tetrameric receptors, the GLUT4 channels get implanted and the glucose enters into the target organs and stored in the form of glycogen. In case of liver, glucose stored in the form of glycogen. In adipose tissue, glucose stored in the form of fat cells. And in case of smooth muscles, glucose stored in the form of glycogen and protein as well. This is happen normally. But during type 2 diabetes mellitus, when the person have type 2 diabetes mellitus, these insulin receptors become defective. Since insulin receptors become defective, therefore there is no implantation of GLUT4 channels on the membrane. So glucose remain in the blood as it is, and there is a increased blood glucose level. This is the pathogenesis of type 2 diabetes mellitus.
Diabetes mellitus. Diabetes mellitus is associated with genetic associations, but the type 2 diabetes mellitus is strongly associated with genetics than type 1 diabetes mellitus. But in case of type 1 diabetes mellitus, we know the gene which is responsible for type 1 diabetes mellitus, that is HLA-DR3-DR4 gene. This gene is responsible for type 1 diabetes mellitus. But in case of type 2 diabetes mellitus, we don't know the name of the genes, and research is still going on. But how we can say that type 2 diabetes mellitus is strongly associated with genetics than type 1 diabetes mellitus? This is by seeing the identical twins concordance rate. That means we already know that identical twins and fraternal twins. These are the two types of twins. If one of the identical twins have type 1 diabetes mellitus, one identical twins have type 1 diabetes mellitus, then other identical twins have 80% of chance that he is also having the diabetes mellitus, type 1 diabetes mellitus, and this is called as the concordance rate, identical twin concordance rate. But in case of type 2 diabetes mellitus, if one identical twin have type 2 diabetes mellitus, then other identical twins have 90 to 95% of chance that he is having the type 2 diabetes mellitus. Here is the 80% and here is the 90 to 95%. Because of this number, we can say that type 2 diabetes mellitus is strongly associated with genetics than type 1 diabetes mellitus. It means that diabetes mellitus occur mostly because of the genetics. How we can prevent the type 2 diabetes mellitus or type 1 diabetes mellitus? How we can prevent the genetics? That is, how we can prevent the genetic cause. It is the one of the cause of diabetes mellitus, that is genetic abnormality, that is mutation in genes. How we can prevent that mutation in genes? Only by our thoughts. Our thoughts are very powerful. You can't imagine that our thoughts makes the everything happens. There is a quote said by Dr. APJ Abdul Kalam that when we think you are strong, then you will become strong. And when you think you are weak, then you will become weak. This all happens because of the thoughts. And in our body, all the internal secretions happens only because of our thoughts. And these thoughts are very, very important. And these thoughts can program the genes as well. And there is a new science coming in front of us, that is epigenetics. Epigenetics. This science tells us about that we can program our genomes or we can program our genes by making the thoughts confirm thoughts. And this is how we can prevent the diabetes mellitus, by positive thinking that we are strong enough to handle everything. But in older age, the thought process becomes slow. That's why in older age, mainly the type 2 diabetes mellitus occur. And type 2 diabetes mellitus mainly occur in old age because the thought process become very, very slow. In that, the gene mutation happens strongly. Think about the thoughts and think about the epigenetics. If you have a strong thought about we can handle everything, then you can handle everything. Thank you.